Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let us start the second chapter for this session, inshallah, and this will be the second last one. So we will revert back to with regards to the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This chapter is with regards to the names that we can attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ones that we cannot, kind of like a basic principle of what can be done and what cannot be done. Let us continue from the beginning over here. Faslun Asma'ullah ta'ala tawqifiyya. The names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are restrictive, right? They're not generic, they're not open for inclusion of everything. They're restrictive. فلا يسمى سبحانه وتعالى إلا ما ورد به الشرع والسمع. Then we do not attribute and we do not ascribe a name to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except that which has been mentioned in the Shara. Wasam with regards to all the sam'iyat that the hadith and that has been mentioned in the Quran. ويجوز إطلاق اسم الشيء والموجود بالعربية والفارسية على حق سبحانه. It is permissible to utilize or use the term or use the name ash-shay, the thing, or wal mawjood, al mawjood, to say the term mawjood, existent, whether it is in Arabic, bil Arabiya wal Farsiya, or in Persian, or in any other language for that matter. Whenever in these texts they talk about the Farsiya, because the Farsi was Persian was the most prevalent other language other than the Arabic for them, so they normally talk about the Persian. But it means that you can transfer this name onto another language thereafter with regards to the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Continuing further, وَكَذَا إِطْلَاقُ اسْمُ النَّفْسِ. Similar is the case with regards to the title or the name of the self, النفس. ثُمَّ إِنَّهُ شَيْءٌ. Then also know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from terminology say, shay'un is a thing, la kal ashya, but not like any other thing that we can conceptualize. And when I say that we can conceptualize, meaning not the ones that we know of, nor the one that we can imagine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's being we cannot comprehend, it does not come into our scope of understanding. So la kal ashya, not like the things we could even conceptualize. Then he says, wa amma ismun nur, right? As for the name an-nur, wal wajh, wal yad, wal ayn, wal jamb, and these words, wa nahwu dhalik, and like these other words, فلا يجوز إطلاقها بالفارسية من غير تأويل. Then it is not permissible to transfer them from their Arabic origin on towards another language, in this case the Persian, min ghayri tawil, without making a suitable interpretation. Right? Now let us understand this. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but let us understand this. These names, an-nur, right, wal wajh, wal yad, wal ayn, wal jam, these terminologies, they have a meaning in their own language. However, when we speak about them, we use the term for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do not regard their meaning to mean what the language suggests, because it is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have already established over here that la kal ashya, not like anything else, laysa kamithlihi shay, there is nothing like unto him. Then automatically, because the meanings of these words they contradict with that ayah, we will not delve into the meaning of those things, because that will cause that kind of a paradox for us. Now what does that mean? we have already covered this once before, that according to the Salaf, the prime methodology over here is tafweed, to relinquish it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to mean with these terms when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used for himself. Right now, similarly, the question comes, right over here, he means فَلَا يَجُوزُ إِطْلَاقُهَا بِالْفَارسِيَّةِ, it is not permissible to transfer them into the another language, min ghayri ta'wil, without any interpretation. Meaning, if you do the rightful interpretation or a reasonable interpretation, then you can change it and transfer it into another language. Let's take an example. For example, the term of Yadullah, right? It would when they would translate it, they would transfer it into another language, they would transfer it to mean that to have a power, right, to have qudra. But remember that when they say to have qudra, this is a this is an interpretation. This is with a transfer with an interpretation, and transfer with an interpretation means that it is not necessarily relaying the exact intended meaning of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to say with it. Rather, this is one of the interpretation that we could reasonably ascribe to it. It could very well have ihtimal, possibility of another meaning, another understanding, which our mind may not be getting towards. Obviously, this is not just any ta'wil. Please understand this, because this is the kind of a finger pointing that you would get from the Ash'ira towards the Ash'ira. When they will make this kind of a ta'wil, then some people would say like, oh, they made an interpretation whereas there was no need for interpretation, and the words have to be taken on their zahir meanings. Right now, this interpretation is not just interpretation. This is ta'wil as-sahih, a valid interpretation, meaning it has to have a basis for that interpretation from the other nusus as well. And that is why, because any mushtarak word, any word that could have multiple meanings within it, and when the Ash'ira make this ta'wil, they establish within their methodology that this is one of the interpretation, the most reasonable interpretation that they can come up with the ihtimal possibility that it could refer to another interpretation that was intended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is ihtimal is already there. Second thing that I'm going to just mention very quickly over here is that over here he said that when we talk about the yad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another language, like I'm speaking in English right now and I'm saying yad of Allah, right? Now what it means over here, وأما اسم النور والوجه واليد والعين والجم ونحو ذلك فلا يجوز إطلاقها بالفارسية من غير تأويل. Then it is not permissible to transfer it into another language without any interpretation. So can I then say by to transfer the word yad, translate it into say hand, right? The hand. Now the thing is, there are two aspects there. Number one, if we say the hand of Allah, would that come under this la yajuz itlaqu bil farisiyah? Would it come under there? And there are some scholars who although do not ascribe to the literal meaning of these words, but they say that when it comes to translation purposes, you can translate into another language, right, provided that you make it crystal clear that that translation is also without any it's not to relay the meaning of that word in English, right? For example, when we say the hand of Allah, not meaning a limb, not meaning the hand, and we don't know what hand of Allah would mean. right? So if we say something like that, according to some scholars, that is permissible, although the more cautious and more safer opinion is what has been mentioned over here, that we do not transfer it. And this is why probably when you hear the bayans and everything as well, the ulama normally, when a nur, they would not just translate it like that, and they would actually just say nur, right? So ideally a scholar should be using the terms like this, the yad of Allah, right? But what will happen is that it would be lost in the scope of speaking to the public masses, and people would not understand the coherence of the sentence structure. So in that case, there is a small leeway, provided one's i'tiqad is correct, that he is not ascribing the meaning, the literal meaning to that, which would relate him towards the tashbih. Continuing further now. لأنها, why are we doing all this? لأنها من المتشابهات, because these words, these terms are from the mutashabihat. بخلاف الأولين, contrary to the ones that were before. For example, the ones he had mentioned here, الشيء, الموجود, nafs, these one, they were not mutashabihat. So these ones are mutashabihat, because if we are going to translate them and mean their translate them into their apparent meaning, then obviously there is going to be a contradiction with laysa kamislihi shay. Okay, then وبعض الألفاظ يجوز إطلاقها مضافة, right? And some of the terms are such, some of the words are such that their itlaq, their usage is permissible, but when they are used in a compound form, when used in a murakkab form. For example, ولا يجوز بدون الإضافة, and it is not permissible if they used out of the attribution form, murakkab form, right? كقوله تعالى, like the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, رفيع الدرجات, right? Raiser of the levels, وقاضي الحاجات, and reliever of the needs, وهازم الأحزاب, and destroyer or the remover, destroyers of the legions or the armies, وفارج الهم, and remover of worries, وشديد العقاب, and swift in his swift of punishment. لأننا ننتهي في أسماء الله تعالى إلى ما أنهانا إليه الشرع, that we will not go beyond the scope with regards to the asma, with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, beyond what we've been restricted to by the Sharia, right? So we will not go beyond that. ولم يرد الشرع بها دون الإضافة, and the Shara in the Nusus, these have been mentioned with this attributive form. Like Rafi al-Darajat has been mentioned as Rafi al-Darajat, so we will keep it to that. We will not go beyond that. This shows how important it is to keep in mind how this is going to work, how all these asma are going to work, and how we should not be callous, and we should not be very relaxed with them, the usage. ولا يجوز إطلاق اسم المحجوب, and similarly it is not permissible to use attribute the term al-mahjub for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-mahjub mean hidden, right? The hidden one, right? وبعضهم جوز لفظ المحتجب, and some of the scholars, they have given permission of using the word muhtajib instead of mahjub. Muhtajib means the one who hides himself, right? لأن الأول يدل على المغلوبية دون الثاني والله أعلم, because the first one, the al-mahjub, it indicates towards maghlubiya, something being overpowered. Why? Al-mahjub means hidden, so who hid him, right? So it indicates towards something else overpowering him to make it hidden. So because that indication is there, it's not permissible to use the term mahjub. Whereas the other muhtajib is the one who hides himself. So that's why he said duna thani. The second one doesn't indicate towards that. The now issue comes, there are some books like Kashf al-Mahjub, right? Unveiling of the exposition of the hidden one. Now some have made an interpretation over there that the Kashf al-Mahjub is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas that is not the case. There is a hidden world, right? The hidden world of malaika, of jinnat, of awliya, of all the karamat and everything. The book, those titles are used for the unveiling of those hidden items, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his mercy unveils it for those awliya. ومن الأسماء ما لا يجوز إطلاقها ولا ضدها. And then there are some names which are not permissible to use themselves, those terms themselves, ولا ضدها, and neither is it permissible to use their opposites. For example, kasakin, like the term as-sakin, the still one. Now we can attribute the aspect of the still one to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, its opposite we cannot attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well, the moving one, right? So wal yaqzan, the awake, we cannot attribute to that, just like the opposite would be the sleeping one. Wal aqil, the intelligent one, opposite will be the safi one, right? Now understand this. These are the positive aspects, right? Why are they not permissible? For example, kasakin, wal yaqzan, wal aqil, right? Why are these not permissible? So he says لِحَدْمِ وُرُودِ الشَّرْعَ بِإِطْلَاقِهَا, right? وَإِطْلَاقِ ضِدِّهَا, because they have not been brought in Sharia. Even if some meaning of it could be understood, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have that meaning, or Allah may have that quality or name attached to him, but Sharia did not use them, so we don't need to go towards and use that, right? Similarly, their opposite as well, and their opposite also, because their opposite brings about the negative aspect. For example, the moving one brings about the paradoxal of the time and space. Wal yaqzan brings about the sleepy one, right? Wal aqil brings about the safi one. Those are not acceptable anyway. وَكَذَا لَا يَجُوزُ اسم الداخل. Similarly, you cannot use the term ad-dakhil, the one who enters, because it doesn't befits Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wal ghaib, or the absent one, it does not behoves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Alayhi subhanahu. Okay, ويجوز أن يقال إنه غيب, right, عن الخلق سبحانه وتعالى. And it is permissible that you can use the term al-ghayyab, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hidden, right? Is hidden from the creation. Now, what is it referring to when it says that hidden from the creation? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expose or will give the barakah of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when the Jannah comes, right? And in this world, he has hid himself from the creation, and there too Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give the bounty of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to whomever he wills, inshallah. So this concludes the second part, inshallah, today, and then we are going to go the next one, and then that would be the last part of this treatise, inshallah. And we will stop here for now and we'll go to the next part, inshallah.